Welcome, seventh graders, Kaiser kids, to our online learning. Hopefully, you're adjusting well to all this change. It's crazy times, I know, but just make sure that you're checking Schoology and emailing me or sending me messages through Schoology if you have questions. I'm sorry we all can't be together, but we'll definitely learn together and push through this. You'll remember this probably for the rest of your lives, so it'll be one of those memories of your childhood that you'll be able to talk about, the year of the coronavirus. But we keep pushing on, and so we're now going to be talking about life in Europe with the kings and queens and who's the boss. Is it the king or is it the church? That struggle still goes on. But life in Europe starts to get a little bit better as we head towards, let's say, the year 1000. So life in the Middle Ages for the average serf or peasant maybe a little bit better, but definitely starts to get better for the upper class. There are new roads, and the amount of trade that takes place really helps Europe grow, whether we're talking about England or what we'd call France or Germany or Italy. Roads and trade really help Europe grow. And hopefully, you're seeing the importance of trade routes as your home, even in modern world, because when trade routes shut down, America, for example, grinds to a halt. And so that's what we're kind of living through right now. But back in Europe in the late Middle Ages, crime is down. There's more food, which means because they have more food, people feel like they can have babies and not worry about them starving to death. So the population of Europe starts to grow. And so we start to pull out of the dark ages by the time we say get to the year 1000. One of the terms your book talks about is guilds. So a guild is a group of organized tradespeople who work, whether they're making bread or glass or blacksmith. We're starting to see in Europe more and more people become professionals and really good at their job, whether it's baking bread or, in the instance of this slide. But you didn't just start off as being the best, you had to work your way up. And so you started off as an apprentice. And if you survived that and you were good enough, you could be moved up to a journeyman. And finally, after many years of working in your craft, you would become a master. And then you would help an apprentice through the process. So guilds, the development of guilds, were an important part of the Middle Ages, pulling out of the Dark Ages, and helping people get skills they would need later on. Now I'll be posting some videos for you to watch and reflect on and respond to me about guilds and life in the late Middle Ages, because we still have all the other things that we had in the Middle Ages, right? We have serfs and peasants, and we have knights, and we have nobles and upper nobles, with the king being at the top. And of course, in the church, we have priests at the bottom, then bishops and archbishops above them, and cardinals above them, and at the very top, the pope. So we still have that structure of the Middle Ages, but things are getting better. And one of the things that's going to be one of the most epic things really in history as far as the Western world is really this battle between the French and the English. So we're in the year 1066. What were you guys doing in the year 1066? Correct answer, Black Abyss. But in 1066, in Europe, the King of England dies, and there's no clear apparent heir to be the king. So a French cousin of the king who died basically says, I'm in charge. And an English descendant says, no, I'm in charge. His name was Harold. So William of France and Harold of England have a massive battle known as the Battle of Hastings. It's really one of those battles that changes the course of world history, because the French actually win at the Battle of Hastings. And so they bring a lot of their French ways to England and become the nobles. And when they do that, it kind of sows these seeds of tension between the French and the English. So even today, there's a little bit of tension between the French and English, and it goes back to 1066. So when the French come over and take over the noble class and run things, they bring with them French words and French customs. For example, if you see a pig in the field, they use the word pig, the English do, because they would grow the pig. But when you see it on your plate and you're eating it, it's pork, which is more of a French word. The same thing with lamb. If you see a sheep in the field, it's sheep, but on your plate, it's mutton, which is more of a French word. So English word for the animal in the field, a French word for when it's on your plate. So the idea is that the French were really running things. English were kind of made to stay in the lower levels. And there's going to be always a struggle for who or what family runs England. And in addition to that, obviously they have to listen to the Pope. So is the king subservient or lower than the Pope? That's something that we have to talk about and we'll see play out in Europe. When William comes over and conquers in 1066, hey kids, when did William conquer? 1066. When he comes over, he organizes England in a new way. Basically, he takes charge. He says things in England have been run too sloppily, and I need to get a better handle on the people that I am now the king of. So he creates this actual book called the Domesday Book. And in this book is a recording of all the people and animals that were in England at the time. So they count the people and what animals and property belonged to those people. This is like what's happening in America today, right? We talked about every 10 years we take a census to try to count the people. That's what William the Conqueror was doing. He's the new king. He wants to know how many people are in his kingdom. So this idea that America has that we count every 10 years, you'll probably be seeing commercials for the census, or your parents probably have been contacted. We do this. This is what basically civilizations do. Leaders do this so we know how many people and what types of people live in that nation or kingdom. But when William comes over, again, he blends French and English ways. And everything seems to be going pretty well. He's considered a king that most English could get behind, but not all kings are good. The next king that we need to talk about is a king that was very unfair and unpopular among the English in 1199. And he increased taxes and punishments for people who didn't pay those taxes. If you've ever seen or read about Robin Hood and how Robin Hood would go against King John, this is the King John. Robin Hood was a mythical folktale bandit who would steal from the rich and give to the poor. Well, the rich were made rich because of all these taxes, and the poor were made poorer because of these taxes. So King John was very unpopular by the time we get to around the year 1200. And by 1215, a lot of the rich nobles who also started off liking John ended up not liking him or his ways. So by the time we get to 1215, we see one of the big things in English history known as the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta stands for Great Charter. King John the King was forced to sit down and sign away some of his powers as king. In other words, he's no longer the absolute ruler of England. He still has a great deal of power, but he's not totally in charge. The Great Charter forces the king to give up some of his power as the nobles watched on. The nobles all brought their army, so the king really didn't have a lot of choices here. He had to sign it. He wasn't happy about it. Why this is a big deal is because for the first time, we see kind of a limit on the king's power. If I go to England today, the king or queen has very little power. And that all began in 1215. It's a slow leak. Like maybe if you had a hole in the tire of your bicycle or your car, it's not a giant puncture that's going to flatten it right away, but a slow leak of the king's power. So by the time we get to modern times, the king really is more of a figurehead, or the queen is more of a figurehead of England. So think of a tire with a slow leak and the air slowly leaking out. that very first tiny hole was the Magna Carta as the air slips away out of the king's tire. So watch back over this. If you have any questions about it, email me as we move into Europe. And just as a side note, I want you to be thinking about European symbols and crests of families. It's kind of a cool thing to think about where your family came from if you're of European descent. A lot of times families in Europe would have kind of pictures to show who they were, because most people back then could not read or write. So a crest of a family kind of showed who you were, especially if you were maybe of a noble descent. Whether we're talking about England, France, or Germany, or Italy, all these areas had symbols for their families. So think about what we've talked about: life in the Middle Ages, getting a little better towards the year 1000, the rise of trade and the rise of towns and guilds. The process by which you became skilled. You would be an apprentice, then a journeyman, then a master. Think about the Battle of Hastings and William coming over from France and setting things up in England. And King John was a very unpopular king, which led to the Magna Carta, which was the Great Charter limiting the king's power. Check Schoology for any videos and assignments dealing with this. Kaiser out. Peace.